And the book that I've chosen to share with you is entitled Showers of Grasshoppers and Other Miracle Stories from Africa. I hope you can see that. It's not a biography, but in a sense it is. It's the stories of three different experiences in Africa. And chapter 1 begins the first unit about grasshoppers. And it starts, and I should tell you, this book is authored by Bradley Booth. The year was a dry one, Grandpa Manu muttered, scratching his scraggly gray beard as he told a story from years gone by. It was a bad time for everyone, especially the farmers. The rains hadn't come for weeks, and my father was worried that we might lose the few crops he had managed to keep alive. The old man straightened his back a moment to stare at the circle of faces sitting around the evening fire. Of course, when the farmers suffer, so does everyone else in the village, he added. Crops have always been the most important part of village life in Nigeria. No crops, no money for the basics in life. No maize to make sour kenke. No beans or tomatoes to sell in the market so we can buy medicine or a colorful dress for Mama to wear. I was just a young man of 7, but even I knew trouble was coming. There would be little we could do that year to satisfy the gnawing hunger in the pit of our stomachs. There was only the hard, twisted roots of the shriveled cassava plants, and cassava can get pretty boring when that's all there is for a boy to eat. And that was it. Without rain, no one could hold out any hope for the farmers, not even the village chieftain or Babalawo, as we called him. Grandpa Manu had a faraway look in his eyes as he stared into the evening fire. The spirits are angry, we were told at a village meeting, and who could argue with the chieftain and his shaman? That's what we had always believed. There were more than 400 spirits in our religion, and we were sure one of them must be angry enough to bring this drought. Grandpa frowned at the weird shadows cast by the flickering firelight. Our fears took over, and the shaman made sure of it. A cascade of sparks jumped into the air as Manu's son, Danso, threw some branches from the Jeri Haiji tree on the evening fire. Flames of yellow, orange, and red jumped to life, giving the fire added brightness. Moths and flying beetles emerged from the overgrowth of vegetation near the campfire, drawn irresistibly to the dancing firelight. The curious little insects fluttered as near the light of the flames as near as they dared without being scorched by the radiating heat. Now and then, one would fly too close, singe its fragile wings, and be caught in the updraft rising from the crackling fire. Danzo stared at his father over the firelight as the story continued. He didn't feel at ease listening to his father speak of evil omens, but when Manu got past the frightening parts, the stories were quite entertaining. Storytelling was part of their family tradition, something that was culturally passed from father to son. It was an art, and Danzu knew sooner or later he would be called to carry on the tradition since he was the oldest of Manu's sons. We thought the drought was bad, Grandpa Manu said, and then more disaster struck. His eyes grew big and his hands moved in an animated gesture. A plague of grasshoppers descended on our village like no one had ever seen. It was a sight to behold, and quite scary for me. I was just a small boy and had never seen such a thing. There were scads of them everywhere, like the sands of the sea. So many you couldn't count them. They swarmed in and covered the countryside like a blanket. They crawled over the roads and pathways by the millions. We couldn't walk anywhere without stepping on them. They landed on the fields and weighed the branches of trees down so heavily that the limbs started breaking off. It was awful, Grandpa said. His voice was getting squeaky. They were like machines. They ate every green leaf and stalk and plant in sight until they left the countryside desolate. No one knew what to do. Grandpa paused for a moment. All we knew was that the local chieftain all we knew was what the local chieftain had told us. You need to give offerings to the shaman, he said again and again, otherwise the grasshoppers will eat everything, and then times will be hard for a long, long time. Danzu tried to imagine such a scourge, but it was difficult. At 35, he only knew the stories his father and the other old men in the village told around the campfires. This particular story was a familiar one, and he had heard it scores of times. But each time he heard the frightening tale, he felt as if he were hearing it for the first time. In his mind's eye, he could see the grasshoppers crawling everywhere like a squirming, creeping carpet. He could almost feel the crunching, moving bodies of the insects under his feet. The children around the fire relived those moments also. Their eyes widened with wonder and fear at the thought of a grasshopper plague. The story Grandpa Manu told was no more real to them right now than a sea monster, but you wouldn't have known it by the looks on their faces. Luami and little Abu, Danzu's smallest children, couldn't take their eyes off of Grandpa as he added detail after detail to the horrific story. Even 15-year-old Motumba seemed mesmerized as he listened to the frightening tale from long ago. Danzo was proud of his family. Abina was a good wife who had given him 3 healthy children. He had a small farm which provided for his family's needs. Their one-room house was small but adequate. Actually, it was more like a hut, but they owned it and the land on which it stood in the savannah on the semi-arid lands of West Africa. The hut was made of mud brick walls with one window that opened to the morning sun. Best of all, Danzu had his health. He was strong and had never been sick a day in his life, something he had inherited, no doubt, from his father, Grandpa Manu. Grandpa lived in a little hut out behind Danzu's house in a grove of coconut palms. He was getting on in years, but he liked his independence and insisted on keeping his own house. And Abina understood that, though she did send Luami over to the house nearly every day to check on him and to take food to him. As Danzu listened to Grandpa's story, he knew he was blessed. Times had been good. He knew nothing of grasshopper plagues or drought. His crops were usually very good. Danzu was sure the good spirits were part of the reason. But he had to admit there were fears in his heart also. Fear of evil spirits ruled the village like an iron fist, and Danzu was never sure when his streak of good luck would end. Without doubt, the chieftain and his village shaman were the religious gurus of the Nigerian town of Baban, Zugu. Everyone called the shaman Father of Mysteries and Father of the Spirits. Danzu didn't want to admit it, but he was as much afraid of the shaman as anyone in town. The flames were burning low once again for lack of fuel, and Grandpa Manu stared into the fire as if that might keep it burning a little longer. We were all scared of the prophecy about the grasshoppers, and with good reason. That was the prophecy. If you don't give offerings to the shaman, you won't please the spirits, and we'll have these grasshoppers. Grandpa's eyes grew wide again. He was right in his prediction. The devastation from the grasshopper hordes was terrible. We just stood there watching the little monsters, green monsters, yes, gobble up everything growing in sight. When they were finished, not a speck of green remained, and nothing could be seen anywhere, nothing. It was all gone. And then they rose in gigantic swarms and flew away on the eastern wind. Let me just look ahead. Maybe we can read a few more pages. Let's see here. Okay, we'll try. No one said anything more for the longest time. After Grandpa ended his story, Luami was nodding off, and little Abu was already asleep in his mother's arms. Do you think it's possible we could see a plague this year? Danzu finally asked. Grandpa Manu shrugged. Who can say? It's dry this year, and we've seen plenty of grasshoppers around, but it usually takes at least 2 seasons of drought to bring out these little pests. Of course, the weather we're having here in Nigeria may be different from what they're having in other regions north and east of us. That would definitely make a difference. The old man stood to his feet, rubbed the back of his neck. Well, tomorrow's another day. We'd better get some sleep. Our bean field won't plant itself. When we're finished, we should probably carry water from the well to water the plants. It'll take time, but with the weather turning drier, it's the only way we can be sure the beans will ripen in time. He stared up at the night sky. I wish we had a way to irrigate our fields. There's got to be a way to get water to our fields more easily. There probably is, Danzu replied sleepily as he picked up Luami and headed for the house with Abina. We'll figure it out next year. Danzu woke up the next morning to the cooing of doves in the coconut palms along the river bottom. Before the coppery sun had emerged from its bed below the milky horizon, the young farmer was hitching the plow to the old ox. Breakfast had not even been served, but he hoped to get a bit of ground turned before the sun got too hot. He would come in later to get a bite to eat. These cool morning temperatures seemed too good to just sit around like a lazy man in the house. A pair of lizards raced along ahead of Danzu as he slapped the reins on the broad back of the ox. Get up there, Suki, he called, as Suki dragged the plow out to the patch of ground they were preparing to seed. The field was already partially turned from his work the day before. With some luck, he'd be able to turn the rest of the soil by noon. It wasn't a large tract, just about 5 acres in size, but the beans he planted there, if the spirits wished it, would be enough to give him the money he needed to support his family. He didn't need much. It was his children he was most concerned about. School fees for the 2 older children were a must, and uniforms and maybe even shoes, if things went especially well. Beans were usually a good cash crop, and this patch of yellow clay soil had grown good beans before. After an hour or so, Motumba, his oldest son, and Grandpa Manu came out and cleared the weeds and brambles that had gotten a foothold in the soil since the last planting. They all worked quickly, taking time only for a short meal of rice and cassava part way through the morning. The soil wasn't too hard, and by noon Danzu had accomplished his goal. The ground was ready for planting. Biting flies buzzed everywhere, and only Suki's swishing tail and Denzo's willow switch kept them from biting Suki mercilessly. Scores of grasshoppers jumped across their pathway as they headed for the house to unhitch the wooden plow. The sun was straight overhead, but Danzo and Suki had already put in a day's work. While Motumba took old Suki to the river for a well-deserved drink, Danzu checked the bean seed he had been preparing for the next planting. The previous night he had put the seed into a large calabash gourd full of water to let them soak. Soaking the seed was an old trick he used to get the seeds ready for planting. Keeps them moist for days so they have a chance of sprouting faster, he told Motumba when the boy came back from the river with Suki. Then they all went inside to escape the torturing African sun. It was too hot to work and too hot to eat. It was even too hot to sleep. The air inside the house was stifling, and everyone finally had to carry their mats outside to take a nap in the shade of the trees. By 3 p.m., the temperatures were bearable again, and the men went back outside to work. "I say there, brother, could I trouble you for a cup of cool water?" a tall, handsome stranger called from the road. "I've walked quite a distance today, and a little shade would feel nice right about now." "Absolutely," Danzo smiled in greeting. "Bring the man some water," he called to Motumba, and then he invited the stranger to sit in the shade of the mango tree. "What brings you our way?" Danzo asked, more for the sake of conversation than anything else. "My name is Kasi, and I'm bringing good news to all the farmers in this area," he said cheerfully. "Good news? I could do with some of that," Danzo half smiled, while running his hand through the gourd full of seeds waiting to be planted. "The soil is right for planting, but we can only guess what the weather will do. Last year was a wet one, and the corn I planted sat in pools of water for weeks. It was a poor harvest, and I didn't have money for school fees, so my daughter had to miss out of school until the next crop came in. And of course, there was no money for extras. Anybody getting sick with malaria had to do without the government medicine." The stranger frowned. "I'm sorry to hear of your misfortune. Farming is hard enough without things going wrong to threaten your crops." He smiled at Motumba when the boy arrived with a large cup of cool water. "Yes, well, that is the luck with farmers. The only thing we can count on is that there is always some risk." Danzo watched the stranger finish his water. "And now you must excuse me, friend," he added as Grandpa Manu came out of the house. "We have much to do before the sun sets today." "Need any help?" The handsome young man set down his traveling book bag. Danzo stopped in surprise. "You want to work in the fields?" "Why not? I've done my share of planting while growing up. You need the help, and the day waits for no one." "Well, you do speak the truth," Danzo laughed, "and you have a sense of humor also." And so the four of them went to work in the fields. And that's where we'll have to stop now. It's getting late. We'll have to close our story reading there for now. We'll pick up, Lord willing, next time we meet.